Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today we have on the show a bit of a serial guest, Zoran from Xcllusive Business Brokers, talking all about selling businesses in a pandemic. And this is a two-part series because Zoran and I had so much to talk about in relation to selling and buying businesses in a pandemic that we really had to make it 2 episodes, not 1. So in this first episode, Zoran and I really drill into this discussion of what's happening at the moment in the pandemic. What's the current market trends? What's business sales and acquisitions look like at the moment? How much activity is in at the moment? What the valuations are and what the impact of the pandemic has been on valuations in a business. We also talked about innovation in selling businesses in this pandemic and some of the practical issues. Now, in part 2 of the 2-part series, Zoran and I reflect on what our position had been a year ago in terms of where we thought the market was at then and where we thought it was going. We reflect on what we got right and what we got wrong. And we also then do a little bit of crystal ball gazing into the future and both talk about what our feeling is in terms of the market and buying and selling businesses in the short and long-term future. So without further ado, here we go with our discussion with Zoran in part 1.
Zoran, welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast. It is always such a pleasure to have you on, and I'm so glad to have you back.
Oh, thank you.
We really must start out this discussion, Zoran, with your last name, because I have a feeling in the intro I'm going to say it wrong. I think I probably did it wrong the last couple of times. How do we pronounce your last name? It's an interesting surname.
You say it first, and I'll tell you if it's wrong or really wrong.
Zoran Sarabaca. Am I saying it right, or is that wrong?
Well, yeah, you say it okay if you speak English,
okay.
But it's actually Sarabaca. Now, it's missing some...
Is that right?
Sarabaca. Sure,
okay.
like
I
a
can't do
Skoda.
I can't.
Skoda. You're a Skoda?
No.
Like a car, Skoda? Skoda?
Oh, Skoda. Sorry, got it.
It's not
yes.
Skoda, it's Skoda.
Right.
It actually has got S with a little thing on top, all right? So it's a little accent. It's pronounced sh as SH, all right? So
Got it. Okay.
there you
all
go.
right,
Zoran
okay.
Sarabaca.
From here on now, I'm just calling you Zoran. How about that?
Okay, well, I'll do that.
Anyway, we're here to have a few laughs today, but also to talk about a more serious side, which is selling businesses in a pandemic. And boy, is that serious stuff or what?
Well, that's as serious as it can be.
That's right. We say, with smiles on our faces as we are sitting in, what is that, our 4th month of lockdown here in Sydney at the moment?
I don't know. I forgot. It's been so long. It's been so long.
Every day is Groundhog Day and feels like the last. So who the hell knows where we're up to? Yeah.
And which lockdown is this? 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th? If you're listening in Melbourne, it's like 7th or something.
Right. Yeah, my team in Melbourne were just so not sympathetic for us. I think when we went down there, they're just a bit like it's time for you guys.
I have a bet with my partner in Melbourne that we're gonna get out of the lockdown first. So Sydney's getting out of the lockdown. So truly, if you're listening to this, all right, bet is $1,000 dinner, all right, that we're going to go out first, and first one that calls the other person from the pub wins, all right? So lockdown means you're back into the pubs.
I love it. I like that.
Shun, again, if you're listening to this podcast, here's the offer. Give me $500 now, and we call it quits. Otherwise, you're going to lose $1,000 soon.
Well, let's see when this is released. Who knows? One of us might some of us might be at the pub by the time this is released. I think we're releasing soon, so the answer is probably not. But this is actually, as we're talking about our teams interstate, it makes me think of something that's quite relevant to this topic of selling a business in a pandemic or buying a business in a pandemic, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there may have been this subject may have been very close to home for you, Zoran. Have you added to the ranks of your businesses by undertaking your own acquisition recently?
Yeah. Well, here talking about buying businesses in pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I thought let's start with your example.
Okay. Well, before we get to that, I just want to mention something. Because we started talking about states. Different states have a different markets. So the market is different in Victoria to what it is in Sydney or New South Wales to what it is in Brisbane. It's a different demographics, different type of businesses are selling. So, for example, if you take Queensland's got a lot of small to medium-sized businesses because most of the head offices are in Sydney and Melbourne. So you don't have a big employees, or you do have a big employees, but not to such a big extent like you would have it in Sydney or Melbourne. So there's way more transactions in Queensland, for example, at the moment. Well, not at the moment, but always was, because there's more businesses in this type of market. Then when you come to Sydney, there's a lot of service-based businesses and distribution, import, export. And when you go to Melbourne, there's a lot more manufacturing, for example. And when you go to Adelaide, there's even more manufacturing out. And so the markets were always different in different states. And since pandemic started, it got multiplied. So a lot of people started moving because of the pandemic. And that's not necessarily running away from the big cities, although that had the impact on it. But there were a lot of people that said moving to Queensland or from one state to another because they already had the plans to do this. And this just pushed plans forward. So we saw a lot of activity, both sellers selling and buyers buying on the other side. And it was really, really active market. So when the pandemic started, everything stopped for quite some time, probably about 3 months. That was first March 2019. And then kind of started slowly recovering. And then when everything opened up, it just went through the roof. It was really hard to handle. It was a bit of a bottleneck because we had influx of these businesses that people were selling. But what happened before the opening, and similar thing is happening now, and I hope it's not going to work out the same because it's really hard to handle this volume. Buyers are there because the money is cheap at the moment. The government, I think today, Reserve Bank said that they're going to keep on buying bonds and they're going to drop down from 5 billion to 4 billion. I mean, these are astronomical amounts. And the money is just going into the economy. The interest rates are cheap. We're doing a real infrastructure. Builders and traders are making a ton of money from that flows into the economy. And honestly, I have not seen more money around during this pandemic. So, and there's also a bit of a insecurity or from both sellers and buyers, and also, but when people are not secure, they either freeze or they make a change because they want to find a more secure place. And what I'm seeing now, that there's definitely a lot of buyers on the market, more than usual, I would say. But there's definitely shortage of businesses on the market. So I would say it's a seller's market. Now, I'm a business broker. Of course, I'm going to say that.
You are, Zoran. Of course you are.
It's a seller's market, always a seller's market.
It's never not a seller's market, Zoran.
So back to what was happening with us. We had a big increase in work coming from Adelaide, but we didn't have a really good presence there. We didn't have a team there. So what happened? There was opportunity to purchase one of the businesses. It was Dell Wood in Adelaide. They've been around for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. And the business sold a couple of times before. It was owned by a really good accounting firm, but it wasn't their main course of business. So we started talking about a bit of a referral system of how can we work together. And that led to say, well, why don't we actually take this on? And then pandemic hit, but we didn't stop. We pushed on. Everything was done via Zoom. Everything was done through over the internet and telephone. And we purchased the business. And I'm yet to meet the people in person. Your team.
And that's a factor. That's a factor right now. Obviously, we're talking today about selling businesses and buying businesses in a pandemic, and it is a thing that's current at the moment that quite often buyers and sellers won't have met in person nowadays, right? Because we've been in and out of lockdown. States have been in and out of periods of locking other states out, and it's just so common right now for buyers not to actually have met the sellers, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. Years ago, we would have looked back and said very unusual, but we're all getting used to it. It's become situation normal, I guess.
Yeah, look, it is a bit of interruption, but people are finding a way around it. There's a lot of interstate deals when you have a buyer in one state buying a business in another, and they just can't go visit. But doing your Zoom calls, doing your video conferences, talking, exchanging information. In some instances, you're gonna get it all the way to the last moment, and they said, "Look, we really can't proceed stage until we really inspect the business." But in some instances, we actually doing the deals, and the owner either chooses to run it remotely, or the old owner stays to help in some sort of role. Sometimes as a manager, sometimes as providing certain services, sometimes as a consultant to help to this transition.
I was just going to say there are some problems, and we'll come back to this. There are some problems with not being able to have proper physical inspection. And of course, you can have someone else go in. And we've had a few matters that have, because our clients have just continued, completing deals through this latest lockdown as well. Things have slowed down a bit, but unlike the first lockdown, things are really still continuing, but just a bit slower. But there are problems, and I think we should come back to those in a minute, talking about what the actual practicality of the issues are of doing a deal in the pandemic.
Well, on this point about practicality, what seemed to work very well, putting a little video together about the capability of the business, operations of the business, interviewing manager. It needs to be done a little bit, well, depending on the size of the business. But if somebody is spending a few $1 million in the business, you really can't do it on your mobile phone. And there's a lot of production houses that they will do something like this between $1,500 and $3,000, and they're going to give you a few minutes, 10-minute, 5-minute videos. They're really going to take you through the business.
Yeah, that's a great idea. What a great idea. I mean, it's quite prominent in real estate, isn't it? Why shouldn't we be using that model in
business? In business. Well, one thing is these are not advertising videos. These are more due diligence videos or sales videos, because businesses are sold on, confidentially, of course, and so you really need to get it to second or third stage before you can release this video. But a good video can actually take you into the business. Look, no doubt about it. It's not as good as going out there and seeing it and touching it and smelling it and feeling it, but it's not far off it. It can really help people make a decision. Hey, this is worth investing more time and money into it. And I think we're going to see more and more this type of deals. And even when we get on the other side of this pandemic, this type of technology is going to be used more and more.
Yeah. So let's dig into then. I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about what we're both seeing as a market trends in terms of what happened last year versus where we are at the moment. And obviously, I completely acknowledge what you're saying, that every state is different, but certainly Sydney and Melbourne have a similar period of lockdown right at the moment. Queensland is a little bit different right at this second, but who knows what the short-term versus long-term future is there. So we'll come back to what we saw last year, what we think is going to happen this year. I think we're probably quite aligned in where we think the market will go. And we did this exercise last year, Zoran, and I think we were both quite right in where we thought it was going to go. So we'll traverse back there and then do a bit of crystal ball gazing. Why not?
Okay.
But before we do that, I just want to get into what are the practical issues. We're selling a business through a pandemic. We just talked about the issues. We can't, buyer and seller can't meet so quite often at the moment. If you're going to do a deal prior to everything opening up again, which means they can't sit down and eyeball each other. But of course, we've got Zoom to deal with that. And I think everyone is getting far more used to Zoom creating that connection that we used to have. I certainly know that I spend my life on Zoom these days.
Very much.
So we've got that practical issue. We've got the practical issue of inspections. Obviously, that can be a real issue, going in and inspecting a business, but we've talked about the video sort of approach. It is something to potentially deal with that, which is a great innovation change that I'm sure will bring, moving forward as well into the sales.
Transparency was always important in business sales. So if the buyer's buying a business, he wants to understand that business.
Yeah, of course.
But when we are face to face and we are not restricted how we can meet and we can do more meetings, we can ask for more information. We have multiple meetings and everything else. You really have to, it is a plug for your podcast, deal room, all right? So you're going to set up a deal room, all right? And, but you do the digital files have to be stored and have to be ready.
Yeah,
but you really need to provide more than what you were in the past, because you can't physically inspect. And physical inspection, it's not going to tell you anything about operations of the business, or about profitability of the business, but it will tell you a lot about operation of the business, because you're going to go and see, and you're going to see something, or something's happening in the business, and you're going to see machinery, how it operates, and you're going to ask more questions about it, and it goes from there. So that tool is not available at the moment. So a really better package you put together, the more information you give to people, better it is. Make sure that it's done in some orderly fashion, so you don't just dump tons of documents in files on them, but it needs to be transparent, logical, sequential, and backed up by evidence. So somebody can actually go through that information and get a really good understanding of the business. Yeah. So even if you can do the meetings, you're probably not going to be able to do as many. So you want to do this in short as possible on time on the physical meetings, which that information provided in advance will help a lot, I think.
100%. And, look, being ready for due diligence, having that information ready to go, it's always been a thing. It's always been a thing that many sellers are particularly, poor at doing. And
it was always a thing, but no one ever done it.
Yeah,
all right?
Yeah.
So,
but now it's more important, right? Because
virtually impossible without it. Because if I see you in person, I will form some opinion about you as a seller if I'm a buyer. And then if I trust you, I'll be okay to get this information. But now I don't have that feeling, so I can't establish the trust, all right? Well, I can to some extent with Zoom and phone, but it's not as good as in person, all right? So what I've got to do is to go buy is information. So if you don't provide that information at the beginning, it really becomes a problem. The whole process, not just later on. You don't get to the end without it.
And I just to add to this, I was talking to a buyer yesterday who's looking at a business, and she provided a due diligence list, I think like 2.5 months ago, and has just received the information in. And, I mean, it's just so important. It's so critical for buyers to be ready to go. I mean, surely it can't have been a surprise to the seller that they were going to need to provide this information.
Really? You want this?
I know, right? And I guess, this is part of the role of a broker as well to help their clients understand. And in some instances when businesses aren't using brokers, this is part of the issue. They just don't understand the things that they need. I don't know in this deal whether there's a broker or not, but if there is, then there's been some communication breakdown because the seller wasn't ready. And if there's not, then this is just another example of the importance of having that deal team around you to prep you for sale.
But that's not uncommon. It's really, really not uncommon. And that's why deals fall over. Like, pandemic, often deals fall over because of the slow information flow.
Yeah.
Because the moment I ask you for something and you said, I'll have this to you in 2 days, and then 2 months later, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I think, what's wrong? Like, what are you making this stuff up?
Like,
right?
clearly the business is not well organized. There's problems. They're trying to fix
I also don't
up.
trust the data. Like, let's be honest about it. I don't trust that the data provided is real.
Yeah, that's right.
So it gets much harder. So that's one technical issue with selling in pandemic. The other, I'm not sure if it's technical or not, but deals are taking longer.
Yeah.
Right. And because deals are taking longer, they don't have to be, but because of the reasons we just talked about, they do take longer. So because deals taking longer, buyers see whatever reason for you was to sell. As the time goes by, that's from the seller's point of view, that reason becomes more pressing.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer and you wanted to move, or whatever the reason is you want to buy, as the time goes by, it becomes more pressing. And but also people's situation changes over time, and like because of this pandemic, I mean, anything can happen in moments' notice, not just in our lives, but in economy, in business, in change of the way the government goes about it. Other businesses open, other businesses closed today. Who's open, who's not, who's not, and it affects the deals. So you really have to do everything possible before you go to the market that's going to help you complete the deal very quickly, right? Because you may going to spend few months dealing with one buyer, his situation or her situation changes, and then you got to start the whole process again with another. All right. So you really got to shorten that as much as possible.
Yeah.
But from the seller's point of view, and that's what I'm saying, you touched on it, and then we kind of drifted from this conversation. But what happened in 2019 in March? Everything stopped.
Yeah.
I kid you not, all right? Our phone didn't ring for 3 days, and we get a lot of calls every day. And third day, somebody in the office said, did somebody check if the phone's actually working? So we called our home number, and the phone rang. Oh, damn it, it's working. Or I was hoping it wasn't. All right.
Of course, we're laughing now. It wasn't so funny then.
Yeah, it wasn't funny back then. And you didn't know what the government's going to do, what support they're going to provide and everything else. And then after about 3 months of this really tough time, we started recovering. And we talked about it, that on the end, when he opens up, it's going to be boom. One thing that we got wrong.
Well, before we get that, let's come to that in a minute, because I know our listeners really are going to want to know what we got wrong. So let's come back to that. But just let's round off before we get to this comparison of last year and then a bit of this crystal ball gazing, which is really where I want to go next. Let's just finish off with talking about these issues with selling and buying a business in a pandemic. And you've given us a really great rundown. But one of the other things that I just wanted to add in before we round this out is this vendor finance issue, because I'm finding there's a lot of cheap cash in the market, but at points it's becoming quite hard for businesses to access cash quickly in terms of finance.
Any deferred payments, and they're getting more common.
They are, and that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing more commonality in deferred payments. It sounds like you are as well.
Well, deferred payments, two main reasons, in my opinion. One is that finance issue. I either can't get the money from the bank, or the banks are lending, but it takes longer, or I can't get the money quick enough, so let's do some sort of finance until my money comes through. Right? The other reason for this deferred payment is security, because it is a bit of uncertain times. So people will buy the business today, but they don't know how this is going to get affected. So they're going to say, okay, well, let's do some sort of deal, because what if everything stops? What if we get another variant or whatever, and we get locked down for another 3-4 months, and my business stops? I need some leeway that I can actually deal with that. So the risk is being shared between the seller and the buyer, and deals are completing well, but we need to work together. And I was always a big believer in, if you're selling the business, you really have to sell it to the friend, not the enemy. Meaning, you have to, the new person, the new buyer that you just met, you really have to build a rapport with them and help them buy your business. And best way to help them buy the business is to really become their friend, and you show everything that's in your ability to help them successfully take on this business. I'm not take all the risk on yourself, but help them be a little bit more flexible with these types of arrangements, with your support and everything else. Same with the buyers. It's not a buyer's market. It's not a buyer's market because there's a shortage of good businesses on the market. And also, it's not that easy to make a deal. So you need the seller as much as the seller needs a buyer. So you really have to build that rapport and friendships in between the buyer and seller before you can get it across the line.
You do, because wherever there's a deferred payment or an earn-out or something where payment is happening over time, not all at completion, then we have this issue that you've got an ongoing relationship, and you need some sort of trust, and what buyers sometimes forget, I think, is that if they're going to have to provide some sort of security for this payment over time, and sometimes buyers forget that. So I think that's an important part of the discussion when we're talking about deferral of payment. Security will always need to be there in that discussion.
That's a subject that you can talk for hours about. And there's
maybe we come back for another podcast on that one.
There's quite a few ways that you can secure it, and some are very practical, some are just traditional methods where I take a security or something, but there are other ways that you can put the security in place. But the trust is important.
It is. And back to the whole pandemic, now we're trying to get to this position of trust over Zoom. And of course, that can make it harder. But we're still doing deals. We're still doing deals that have deferred payments, so it can be done. It just is that it can be a little bit harder.
Look, it's really interesting. Even pubs and hospitality places are still selling.
Yeah.
And But there is some sort of deal, because look, if you're in a business and business is shut and you can't support it, the longer you stay in this, more money is going to cost you. So maybe reducing the price is not such a bad idea, because faster you do it, you're reducing your losses. And purchaser that's coming in has got a different calculation. It's a different position. So even there, deals are happening.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, look, I guess the one thing I want to throw in now is, of course, we are about to launch a webinar where we're really getting deep into some of these topics that we just talked about today in relation to selling a business in a pandemic. We're going to talk about how to prepare a business for sale, what you need to be aware of, the impact on valuations, and really dig deep into some of these considerations when you're looking at potential deferred payments or vendor finance or earnouts or whatever the case may be. So you'll find in your show notes here a link straight through to register for that webinar. And if you're not able to make it live, we'll also have an on-demand version for you available into the future, so you can go back and watch the webinar. Of course, if you can make it live, then you can add your own questions and get your questions answered. So, recommendation is to make it live, but no worries if you miss that. Zoran, thank you so much for coming in today. I want to come back and continue the discussion soon, coming right back to our point about what we discussed, what our crystal ball gazing was.
We're back to that. All right.
Yeah, how well we did, and maybe what our thoughts are for the future. And so for our listeners, Zoran, how do they get in contact with you if they would like some assistance selling their business in a pandemic?
Just Google Xclusive Business Sales. You can find us on YouTube, on Instagram, on websites, in yellow pages.
In the
everywhere.
Yellow pages. Well, they're everywhere. You can't miss them. Okay. And we'll, of course, link to Zoran in our show notes.
Well, that's it for part one of our two-part series, all about selling businesses in a pandemic. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this podcast episode if you'd like to read it in more detail. Now, of course, there on our website, we talked a little bit about the webinar that Zoran and I will be running, where we're going to dig deep into the topic of selling and buying businesses in a pandemic. We're going to be talking about deal structures, earnouts, retentions, and all sorts of other topics that are particularly relevant to deals that are being done right now. And we are also going to talk about elements for prepping for sale and prepping for acquisition that you need to be aware of for when you're selling or buying a business in a pandemic. So if you're interested in coming along to that webinar, make sure you hit the registration link on our show notes page on your podcast player or at thedealroompodcast.com, and look out for this episode with Zoran and I, and you'll find the registration link there. Now, over at our website page, you'll also find details of how to contact Zoran, and you will also be able to find details of how to contact our legals at Aspect Legal if you or your clients would like to discuss any legal aspects of sales or acquisitions. One of the things that we believe very strongly here at Aspect Legal is the importance of proper preparation in terms of setting you up to do the best deal you can and to make sure it has as few road bumps as possible. So we have a number of products to help businesses prepare for a sale and get sale ready, and we've also got getting acquisition ready products available as well. So if you're looking at a sale or an acquisition into the future, get in contact with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal on our free call line to have a chat to them about how our prep for sale and prep for acquisition audits can assist you. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed what you heard today. Don't forget to tune into part 2 of our two-part series, where Zoran and I do a bit of crystal ball gazing. We'll have a look at the discussion that we had a year ago in relation to the market and what we saw for the future then. And we'll also talk now about where we see the market right now and where we see it moving in the short and long-term future. So don't miss out on that. Make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast player and join us for the next episode of the Deal Room Podcast. Thanks for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey on the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time.
Aspect Legal has a number of great services that help businesses prepare for a sale or acquisition, to help them prepare in advance and to get transaction ready. We've also got a range of services to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. We provide a free consultation to discuss your proposed sale or acquisition. So see our show notes on how to book a time to speak with us, or head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room Podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.